Good morning, everyone.
Hello.
While some people are still joining, let's begin. Welcome to the fourth module of the climate budget training course of the Climate-4-CAST project. My name is Olena Zinchuk, if you remember from before, or if you're seeing me for the first time. I work for the Union of the Baltic Cities Sustainable Cities Commission, and we are organizing this training course in the framework of the Climate-4-CAST project. As I mentioned, today is our last online training module. After this, we move to the physical meetings. So yeah, really happy to have you all here. Let's begin with a few technical things, since this is still online before we move in person. So event will be recorded just like previously. We are compiling the recordings and they will be part of the training materials, but just the main part of it, not the discussions that we will be having in the end. If you still haven't, you can add the name of your organization next to your name into the participant list so that we could see who's joining from where. And generally, we ask the audience to keep yourself muted, but when we open the floor for the questions from the audience, then you can also unmute yourself and ask after the presentation. So me and Maria, whom you can see on the screen as well, are your hosts for today, and you can also write us direct messages if you have some technical issues or other things. Otherwise, you can ask questions in the chat, and we will try to reply to them after the presentations of our speakers or at some other time during the discussion. So let's see how the whole flow goes today. So the agenda for our today's topic, which is the cost and benefit assessment of the climate actions, is to first, for new participants, if we have such today, to still reintroduce our project and the overall goal of it. And after that, we will give you a short intro into how, within the subject of climate budgeting, the approaches to the actions assessment could be handled broadly. Afterwards, we will dive a little bit deeper into the decision support tool that our project has developed, and in particular, how it helps with the a little bit more in-depth evaluation of the actions, changing the scenarios and visualizing the results, which is basically what it is intending to do for the cities that are applying it. We'll have a short break so that you can stretch your legs and refill on the coffee. After which we will hear the a little bit longer this time presentations from our pilot cities, where they would show how they have approached impact assessment in their particular piloting examples. So we will hear from the cities of Tampere, Aarhus and Norderstedt. After that, I will have a pleasure to invite you for the fifth module, which will be the one after this one, and which we plan to hold in person in Turku. And after that, already pretty traditionally, we will finish with the breakout rooms, where we would have moderated discussions with each of the presenting cities present in one of the groups, so that you can ask more questions and dive a little bit deeper into their experiences. So yeah, without further ado, let's go into the first part of the agenda, which is very, very brief project overview, especially for those of you who are hearing it not for the first time. Donald, to you.
Indeed, thank you, Elena. Good morning, everyone, and warm welcome also from my side to this module 4, focusing on analyzing costs and benefits of climate actions, building scenarios, and interpreting results. So my name is Donald Alimi. For those who don't know me, I'm a researcher at the Hafen City University, Hamburg, and at the same time also the coordinator of the Climate-4-CAST project. We are very glad to have you here today. So this session, like the whole training course, is designed to take us a little bit behind the scenes of how cities approach climate action and climate budgeting in practice. And before we move deeper into today's topic, I'll try here to provide a brief overview of the project behind this training course. So the Climate-4-CAST project is a 3-year project founded by the Interreg Baltic Sea Region program. And at its core, at the core of the Climate-4-CAST project is the Climate Action Decision Support Tool, or the CADS tool, in short, how we call it in the project. It's an open source solution that helps cities to link climate targets, actions, and budgets in one place. We are a consortium of 10 project partners across the Baltic Sea region, 6 cities, together with our tech partner, Causal, the Union of the Baltic Cities Sustainable Cities Commission, and 2 universities, Uppsala University and the Havel City University in Hamburg. So the key challenge we are addressing is quite straightforward, I would say. It's the following. So how to turn climate commitments into real and implementable actions in cities. So cities often, as most of us know, face limited budgets, capacity constraints, and fragmented decision-making. Climate budgeting can help, whether as a formal governance tool or a more flexible approach, but in practice, many cities still struggle to apply it effectively. And this is where Climate-4-CAST comes in. So the CADS tool we are developing in this project supports the implementation of climate budgeting, but it also goes beyond that. For example, it can be used for emissions monitoring or to communicate cost effectiveness of different measures to be implemented. But without going too much into the details, as you will see it in action very shortly after my presentation, the CADS tool essentially helps cities to compare different action scenarios and to better align spending with their climate goals of the cities. In our 6 pilot cities, we have tested the tool with real measures, and the results show how the tool can support actually prioritizing different actions, how it can improve communication across different departments, and also integrate emission data into governance processes and discussions, therefore ultimately supporting and strengthening also the decision-making of the cities in this context. And here with the slides, also a quick update. So the CADS tool and the guidelines, which are the backbone also of this project, will be published in the coming few days in our project communication channels on our webpage primarily. So you'll also soon be able to explore that yourselves. So this is my last slide. Where do we stand today? The project runs from November 2023 until October 2026. So October this year is unfortunately, the end of our project. And where we stand now is we have completed the piloting phase in the 6 cities and are now finalizing the tool and the guidelines, as I mentioned in the previous slide. And at the same time, we're now in the last year of the project, focusing more and more on sharing our results and lessons learned with a broader audience, including through this training course. And yeah, with that, I'll hand back to Elena to tell us a bit more about the training course and to guide us also into the next part of the agenda. Thank you very much for your attention. Over to you, Elena.
Thank you, Donna. So yeah, a very, very brief recap of the training course. Kicked off in Malmö in autumn last year. We had the first climate budget summit. And there are recordings and presentations from it, and we have repeated it in the format of the UBC Talks webinar later in December. Afterwards, we had 2 more online modules about obtaining mandate and setting cooperation, and also about the creating of the climate actions portfolio and emission data inventories. These were the 2 previous modules. today we are focusing on analyzing costs, benefits, building scenario, and interpreting results. So we're already getting to a beefier part of the process, so to speak. And yeah, as I mentioned, this is our last module online. After that, we will come together for the module number 5, practical hands-on training with the tool that, as Donald mentioned, is published any day now. We will welcome you to Turku for the 1st and 2nd of September. Please stay till the end of the meeting. We will share a little bit more information about that event as well. And then the idea is to wrap up the training course with the module number 6, which will also be our 2nd Climate Budget Summit. And we aim to hold it in October in Brussels in connection to the EU Week of Cities and Regions. But this is still in the preparation, so we are not able to give you exact dates, but it will be during the mid-October. So hopefully we'll meet many of you in there as well. And the point of the final module would be to see how the results of this whole process were implemented, in which cases they aided the decision making, how they were used to communicate with the politicians and citizens, and other valuable lessons learned, which we would have from both piloting in our cities and the training course exercises and learning process as well. So this is the layout of the course presented once again. But yeah, I think we are quite okay on time, so we can dive into the subject of today. But still, if some of you are not registered, you can always register for the whole kind of informational support with the training course through this QR code that we have on the screen, and we will be informing you to then separately register for all the events. So far, the registrations were via Zoom, where we were hosting these online trainings, but then once we move into the physical events, those would be the different types of registrations. So in order to stay informed and up to date, please subscribe in here or very, very carefully follow our website and social media channels. But yeah, more information about Turku at the end of today's meeting. And now we move to the first presentation of the content of today. And this would be about how we see different approaches to the climate actions assessment in the framework of the climate budgeting. So I welcome our colleague Kim from Hafen City University, who will give you a brief introduction on the subject.
So as Elena said, I'm Kim Tatum from the Hafen City University in Hamburg, and we've also been working on the research side of this topic, so not only looking at our tool itself and developing these sort of innovative approaches in the project, but also an overview on how climate budgeting is carried out as an instrument in various different cities implementing this. So I want to give a short introduction there. In the previous sessions of the training course, we've covered what is climate budgeting and what are sort of the formal approaches or informal approaches to this with several real world city cases. So I won't go into particular detail about the definition of climate budgeting or the particular steps of sort of this recurring process that the cities carried out. And we've also already reviewed current examples of emissions calculations processes. So for example, there's a Danish national collaboration model and various methodologies that have been adopted by our Climate-4-CAST pilot cities for their emissions calculations. So we also refer back to the previous recorded materials online for that information. And today we will turn to the financial aspects and cost-benefit analysis. So what we really are looking at now, following the logic of climate budgeting, is how we can best support decision makers with information about both the financial and climate impacts of municipal actions. So coming out in the 4th session, we're tying this concept of climate budgeting together and really dealing with the question of, if we know what the emissions impact of a particular action is, how can we know what the financial impact of an emissions action is? And how can we put this information in a format that's understandable for the decision makers who actually have to come to a choice about some aspect of this action. This will all be covered shortly in much greater detail, but just a chance to say this is the sort of key value of the CADS tool that is developed in the project. This would be one of the first really open source and accessible tools that gives people working in cities the chance to combine these climate information and financial information into a single interface. So instead of running a bunch of cost projections or savings projections and all of this other information that you might already have, but running it in Excel and doing the effort to put it together in some complex way, this tool can help support that and also maintain a longer term and consistent method of doing that. So that's why this is so relevant to the climate budgeting process itself, even though the tool does not require you to have a climate budget formally. It complies with the logic of climate budgeting. And after my presentation, we'll get a lot more information about how the tool works and some very specific examples of what these outputs can look like from our colleague Michael from Causal. So starting off with the climate budgeting approach, we want to emphasize that the key step here, before beginning any particular detailed analysis, is a definition of the purpose and the objectives of the analysis. It's a preliminary step, but you need to consider what you want to assess and in what detail, because as we add further complexity, and it's the same with the carbon emissions aspect, as you add further complexity, further variables into the calculation, the level of complexity increases also in what you want to explain later on to others. So first, you have to determine what information is actually valuable to that target audience, that decision-making audience. Who are they and what is their main concern? And a second question to ask is, what type of decision is to be made? Are you looking at a single big investment that the city might make and considering how that investment could be made? Are you looking at recurring projects that might need to be carried out over time or at particular different time frames, in which case the length of a project implementation might become a variable? It's very relevant for the work. Or it could be something like the design of an action or its intensity. The decision might be related to, for example, the number of charging stations to be installed by the city for electric vehicles, and at which point you reach a certain level of return on that investment. So these questions are really important, and it pays off to have these discussions internally and in detail very early on, because all of these factors influence at the end what is possible: data collection, the resources for the modeling, and the concerns with precision. So obviously, the data that you need to make a really accurate calculation is going to be difficult to find in certain cases. So reducing the amount of data needed by having a very specific question to answer from the beginning is a wise choice. Also, the resources for financial modeling, just in the capacity of how to project these things, what level of complexity, how many variables to take into this calculation. This is also a question of staffing and effort. And it should be clear that you don't possibly have the chance to model your entire climate plan from a financial aspect. Maybe it's a good idea to begin in one place and build up a sort of methodology of the calculation from there. And lastly, precision is an issue. We know in many cases, decision makers want a number, an output at the end, and they want to know that you're confident in it. But of course, there's always uncertainties that come into things. So how precise of a calculation do you really need to produce? Is it okay to produce a range? Or is it okay to say, well, if we have scenario A, we would have this type of outcome, and scenario B would have this other type of outcome? Think about how you need to communicate these things, and that will help you decide what information you need and what level of detail and effort needs to be put into sort of justifying the outcomes that you have. In our previous sessions, we presented a little bit about the research effort that we've made together with our colleagues at Uppsala University about the way that climate budgeting is carried out currently in cities, or mostly around Europe, but also worldwide. And based on this research, we have interviewed 9 cities and created a type of typology of approaches to climate budgeting. And I think that this really illuminates the different ways that these cities approach these preliminary questions of what they're measuring and how they want to do these impact assessments. So we presented, I think, in the second module of the training course, these three different approaches, but I'll briefly go through each of the three approaches again. And in this case, explain a little bit more how they handle what they want to measure and what they want to calculate and what type of answers they're looking to get from these questions. So the first approach is the operationalizing approach, which is rather the most traditional one, which we would connect to cities like Oslo. And this is a very negotiated-based approach. They want to concretize sort of the strategic climate goals of the city into specific measures. So the process actually inputs these financial and climate concerns into the measure development as part of the climate budget development. So they're doing assessments early on. This is useful because they already have done some decision-making about what is important to measure, because they're using it to determine things like the intensity or the scope of an action that might be carried out as part of the climate budget. And this is all consistently framed within their annual municipal budget. So these individual action level assessments, they are part of the expenditure planning for the municipal budget year to year. And so what they want to assess is just what's going into that municipal budget year to year. This might increase in the future. They don't have to cover in their scope all of the possible budget lines in the municipal budget. So they have the chance to expand this, but it's a time limited and an amount limited determination of the financial aspect, because it's related just to the annual municipal budget, and it's related to what can be funded in that budget in that year. So the goal setting is quite clear. And finally, this impact assessment modeling can, because it's already existing in an early phase, then be directly connected to a monitoring process. So the assumptions that they've made in this original assessment, that they might change, for example, the number of units installed of a car charging device, those can be connected to reporting indicators. So that can be used then in the future to track the climate budget implementation by using those indicators through a mandatory reporting process to cover then and validate the results that they get. This is quite a transparent method, and it also leads to a nice level of consistency for future assessments. But it's complex, and it requires a lot of negotiation and takes actually quite some time. I mean, Oslo themselves have been building up this method over years. Another approach to climate budgeting is the facilitating prioritization approach. And this is a more concrete approach to climate budgeting in cities which already have a rather specific and well-delineated climate action plan. So their measure development process for their climate actions has happened outside of the climate budget process primarily, and during the climate action planning process. So they don't have this level of financial aspect included into these early assessments because it's been primarily a climate assessment process in the past. And the goal of the climate budget is then to translate these well-defined climate measures into some level of financial information that helps prioritize the measures or determine how they should be implemented. So here it's important to maintain a level of comparability across the assessment assumptions from a financial perspective that didn't already exist in the climate perspective. Something might be, for example, the energy cost factors. So in this approach, it's important to make sure that you understand the basic assumption made for something, for example, like energy cost or the change in energy cost over the future, because this will end up affecting the financial assessment of all of the measures across that climate plan, as their assumptions have also been the same. We also note in this approach a stronger influence of the financial department in decisions, because the climate aspect has already been covered through such a strong climate action planning process. They're pre-validated from a climate perspective in most of their actions. But the financial aspects are then what needs to be considered as part of the climate budget in order to actually prioritize the decisions. So you see a much more financially relevant decision-making process. And as a final step, we have the target and assess approach, which we identified, which takes quite a separate approach to the previous two, rather than basing it directly inside the climate strategy. It's a targeted assessment of specific major or large investment projects. This has a potential for a much higher level of detail, depending on the investment itself and the nature of that. But because it's about a specific project, it allows many aspects of that specific project to be defined in detail and assessed both from a climate and a financial perspective in detail. This also opens up the chance for design and other investment choices still to be influenced as part of the climate budgeting process, because you could make multiple scenarios, taking the example of a building implementation, a large building, that you would compare different energy efficiency standards and already have the chance to run a scenario process during the design of this investment and consider which of those might have the best return on the investment. And here it's an alignment issue of these long-term capital programs with the overall climate strategy. So it's not that the climate strategy is not connected, but it's not an explicit connection either to the municipal budget annually or to the climate action plan itself, but rather a strategic connection to ensure that a long-term capital program is also compliant with these overall climate goals. So looking at these three different general approaches, I think it illuminates a little bit that it's not just a single issue of doing cost-benefit analysis, but really a question of how you want to do such an analysis, who your target group is, and how to best connect this to the information that they need to know. And there's a lot of legitimate ways to approach this. So we don't want to put a too tight boundary on the climate budgeting topic itself, but really make sure that everyone understands that it's an open and flexible way to improve the climate outcomes of decisions that are already happening in the municipal context. So these are general approaches. Later on, as Elena presented in the agenda, our Climate-4-CAST cities will provide some specific examples of how they have done calculations and how they approach this issue. So I think we'll get the more specific ones there. They don't necessarily align with this general research approach, but that's not the point of this. We want to then show you the hands-on way of working with it rather than a generalist research side. But in the meantime, then Michael can also show you more about the CADS tool and how our tool outputs can inform these questions and inform the way that the process is carried out on the ground. So from my side, I would like to just leave with a couple of key takeaways. When you're considering emissions assessments and when you're considering financial assessments, both begin with the level of detail and scope that suits the resources and funding decisions to be made. You can start small and you can expand over time. That's the best way to do it. Ask yourself what the output information is that decision makers need, and make sure you clarify if there are any basic financial assumptions, especially in your business as usual scenario for climate, that you need to account for in your financial associations. It's very important to avoid double counting. So if you have some assumption like a change to the energy mix or a change to the energy cost that is in your business as usual scenario, definitely make sure to include this and be aware of this so that you don't end up messing up the calculation with something that is inconsistent then with the planning that's been done in the past. So inform yourself about the local process. With that, thanks a lot for listening in. And if you have any questions later in the breakout room, feel free to ask me or send an email anytime.
Thank you, Kim. You already introduced Michael, basically. So yeah, Michael, just go ahead and share your screen. I think we can take a few questions also in the chat if something is needed to be answered soon. So yeah, please feel free to ask in the chat, and let's continue with Michael's dive into the CADS tool. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Just let me know if there's any trouble with the slides as we go. But to briefly introduce myself, my name is Michael Mechnick. I'm a sustainability data scientist with Causal based in Helsinki. So we're the technical partner on the Climate-4-CAST project, responsible for the technical implementation of our climate action decision support, or CADS tool. So I'll be covering action impacts, scenario building, and cost-benefit analysis in the CADS tool from more of a technical perspective. So we'll begin with a look at action impact modeling. So what's generally required to estimate the impacts of potential climate actions, what's possible within the CADS tool itself, and what needs to be done outside the tool. Here we'll consider both the case where we have a single estimate of the impact trajectory and where we want to consider a range of possibilities or assess the sensitivity of our forecast to uncertainty in that trajectory. Then we'll look in more detail at how results are presented in the tool. So we'll take a look at the actions list and the summary statistics that are presented there, the detailed action pages, and on those where we can see the causal chain from the intervention to different outcomes. And finally, cost effectiveness and the detailed cost benefit graphs, where we can see a visual summary and compare all the actions that are in the tool together. Finally, we'll look at scenario building in the CADS tool, so creating different predefined scenarios and then experimenting with custom scenarios. So action impact assessment. So when we're considering a new climate mitigation measure, we generally like a quantitative estimate of the results we can expect across all of our indicators of interest. So that could be reduction in emissions, energy consumption, and the financial costs and benefits of the action. So in this regard, we're often asked what can be done with the CADS tool. So if we're considering a new mitigation measure, to pick a common example, say replacing street lighting with LED lamps, how can the tool help estimate those KPIs? So the CADS tool allows for a wide range of implementations. So the answer is that it depends a bit on your tool's setup. In short, the tool is able to calculate action impacts within the scope or the extent of your baseline model. So to explain this a bit further, I'll first briefly review baseline calculations in the tool. So this will be familiar to those who have attended previous training modules, but it's worth another look now. So the CADS tool allows users to explore a city's emissions inventory and forecast in a very visual and user-friendly sort of way, like we're seeing here. But behind this user interface, under the hood, there's a calculation model. And this calculation model is structured. It takes the form of a causal chain or network, like we're seeing here. And this is driven by the data that's fed into the tool. So let's just consider a simple baseline setup based on the streetlight example. So city user can begin with a few known quantities. So the electricity consumption of the city's street lighting in megawatt hours per year, and the emission factor of electricity in kilograms of CO2 equivalent per kilowatt hour. With these, the tool is able to calculate the annual emissions associated with street lighting. In addition, the city user can enter the unit price of electricity, say in cents per kilowatt hour. So in the same way as we calculate emissions, we calculate, the tool is able to calculate the annual energy cost associated with street lighting. So now let's say the city user wants to include a streetlight replacement action in the CADS tool. Given this basic setup, this basic setup here, the city can estimate the annual reduction in electricity consumption that they achieve by replacing some portion of their street lighting stock, and enter this in the tool in this yellow box here that represents the action. And then the tool takes the impact assessment from there and calculates the resulting emissions reduction and reduction in energy costs. So given this setup, the causal depth of this calculation model, we see that the tool can calculate certain impacts and that the city needs to calculate certain other impacts outside the tool. In this case, the energy savings that we will achieve by replacing a certain number of streetlights with LED lamps. So if we take this baseline model and make it a bit deeper, so rather than entering electricity consumption directly, the city might enter the number of streetlights operated by the city of different lamp types and the average annual energy consumption of each lamp type in kilowatt hours per lamp per year. The tool then calculates baseline energy consumption and then resulting emissions and costs. So the action might then, the action that we add to the tool might then change the number of streetlights of different types, shifting these numbers from old technologies to new. And then the tool takes the impact assessment from there. So here we really see the benefit of causal depth in that baseline calculation model. The greater the depth, the fewer action impacts need to be calculated outside of the tool. Within the Climate-4-CAST project, we refer to these differing approaches as the simple versus the detailed action assessment. So the first case, where we're entering the energy reduction directly, that exemplifies the simple approach. And as we increase the causal depth of the model and intervene at higher points in the causal chain, we transition into the detailed approach. So two additional benefits of causal depth in the baseline model. First is that we have many more places we can intervene in this system. So we can include actions which shift the number of streetlights of different types, but then also the energy intensity of different lamp types and the emission factors of electricity in this case. Second benefit is that if multiple actions affect the same system, the tool automatically handles interactions between the actions, so the synergies and dampening effects that actions can have on each other. So in this case, for example, if a city both reduces energy consumption from street lighting and then also reduces the emission factor of that energy consumption, those two actions have a dampening effect on each other, each making the other less impactful. So depending on your use case, the benefits might justify the additional effort that's required to set up this more detailed baseline model. So again, regarding use cases, the CADS tool supports a wide range of applications. So from a modeling perspective, from general top-down assessment to very detailed project-specific bottom-up assessment. Again, if we think about the streetlight example, a city may want to include a very high-level mitigation initiative that doesn't come with specific implementation details at this point. Say from the city's Climate City contract. Something like energy efficiency measures in the city's buildings and infrastructure that's intended to reduce energy consumption by a certain percentage by the year 2030. In this case, the baseline doesn't need to be any deeper than energy consumption, because that's where the action would plug in. On the other hand, a city might want to include a very specific project that's on the table for political discussion. So something like switching X number of streetlights in Y city district from HPS to LED lamps in 2027. And in this use case, then the city might benefit from greater causal depth in the model. And I think we'll see more of this range of use cases in the pilot cities presentations that will follow. So one final comment on action impact assessment. So to this point, we've assumed action impacts are represented as a single known time series. In some cases, however, we might want to consider a range of possibilities, either to allow the user to define, say, the level of ambition of an action in the tool, or to assess the sensitivity of results to certain parameters or details of implementation. So for this, it's possible to define adjustable parameters in the CADS tool, both on action impacts and on baseline quantities. These then appear in the tool's user interface as these sliders that we see here. In this example, both the initial unit cost and the annual change in that cost for different energy carriers, so we see electricity, fuel oil, and district heat, are adjustable in this way. With this kind of functionality, so with these sliders, we can answer what-if questions in the tool. So what if the emission factors or the unit prices were different? Or in the case of actions, what if the renovation rate or rate of adoption of some initiative were different? Does it change our results? And if so, does it weigh, or how does that weigh in our decision making? So having talked now about how action impacts are calculated in the CADS tool, let's turn now to how results are presented in the tool. So tool setups usually include an actions page as one of the main pages that's available in the navigation bar that's across the top of the tool site. So when we arrive on an actions page, the first thing we see is a list of all actions included in the tool. So actions can be grouped and color-coded, and that group is shown in the first column of this actions list. Next is the action's name, and then a checkbox indicating whether the action is included in the current scenario. And we'll come back to scenarios in a bit. Finally, if both emissions and financial costs and benefits are included in the tool's calculations, then we have 4 summary statistics that are shown. So first, the total cumulative emissions impact for the period of interest that's selected up in the scenario bar. And then the annual emissions impact in the target year. Then we have 2 different financial metrics. So the net cost of the action for that same period of interest, that's cost minus benefits, and the cost efficiency. That is the cost in the local currency of reducing CO2 emissions by 1 ton. So a negative cost efficiency indicates that we're saving money as we reduce emissions. So this first action in this list, for example, saves nearly 300 euros for each ton of CO2e reduced. So these metrics, and especially cost efficiency, can be used to build a case for prioritizing certain actions, and it's possible to sort the list by any of these columns. Again, financial costs and benefits can be introduced directly by an action. For example, an action can introduce investment costs. Costs may also precipitate from an action's other impacts. So reduced energy consumption resulting in reduced energy costs, for example, or if we're changing a count of different units that we're tracking, there might be a per unit maintenance or operations cost that changes. So opening the actions card by clicking the little arrow that's circled here at the far right reveals the actions description and gives us a how is this calculated link, which takes us to the actions details page. So if we go there next, so here again, we see the actions description. And here, the city of Tampere has included links to this action in their climate neutrality roadmap. And then we see the actions outcomes below, both emissions, but also energy and costs in this case. So for those now that are really interested in understanding how an action's impact is calculated within the tool, all the assumptions and calculation steps involved, clicking the Show Calculation button reveals the behind-the-scenes causal network. So if we click on that, we reveal the causal chain or causal network from the point where the action intervenes down to the outcome that's selected. So in this case, net emissions. So this shows that actions can include a complex set of impacts and outcomes across different metrics or different indicators that we're interested in. So this action involves replacing oil heating systems across the municipal building stock with geothermal and air-to-water heat pumps. So to estimate the impact, the action reduces fuel oil consumption and increases electricity consumption used by the heat pumps and the geothermal systems, respectively. So this cascades down to more electricity-related emissions and less fuel oil-related emissions. And if we expand one of these little cards in the chain, we can see that on the whole, it decreases building heating emissions by nearly 15 kilotons from the time it's implemented to the year 2030. Likewise, electricity costs increase and fuel oil costs decrease. So combined with other actions in the tool implemented simultaneously and affecting different components of the city's heating and electricity and transportation, other related systems, we start to build a really comprehensive understanding of how to get to our emissions reduction targets. So now let's look at two more visualizations of results that are available in the CADS tool, and then we'll turn briefly to scenarios. So back on the actions page, if we switch from list to graph, and then choose to see the impact on cost efficiency, we're presented with a classic MAC curve, or marginal abatement cost curve. So here, the more negative the bar, the greater the financial savings per ton of CO2e reduced. And the wider the bar, the greater the total emissions impact, emissions reduction. So it's easy to see here which actions are the most cost efficient and which have a small versus a large effect on emissions. So here I've filtered to just building heating actions, and I've highlighted the fuel oil heating replacement action that we looked at just now on the details page. And we can see that this one falls basically somewhere in the middle. It saves 560 or so euros per ton of CO2e reduced and reduces emissions by 15 kilotons. So this is a bit less cost efficient, but more impactful than, say, this very narrow second bar from the left here, which represents an energy efficiency renovation action. Finally, in that same impact on dropdown, selecting impact on cost benefit, we're presented with a CADS tool's cost benefit analysis visualization. So here, each action's total costs and total benefits are shown side by side, the red bar indicating costs and the green bar indicating benefits. The net cost or benefit is shown by the vertical black bar. The further to the right, the greater the net benefit. So this provides an overview of our actions. If a city has tracked costs in the tool by cost type, so say investment, operations, energy, and so on, and by cost owner or stakeholder, it's possible to see this detailed breakdown by opening an action's outcomes of interest card. So if we open the little drop down there, we get this new card. So the card that opens here, we see separate cost and benefit bars for each stakeholder. And these then are divided, the bars are divided by cost type. So this additional detail helps to tell a more complete story about each action. For example, this action about solar panel installation, we can see relatively minor benefits for society as a whole and for the city region. All costs and the majority of the benefits are seen by private actors who still see a net benefit due to the energy savings, despite bearing the investment and the maintenance costs of the new photovoltaic systems. So the last thing we'll cover before opening the floor to questions and taking a short break are the scenarios. So at the top of nearly every page in the CADS tool, there's a scenario bar, which basically, given all the complexity we've discussed, still allows us to control exactly the situation that we're seeing results for. Any updates made in the scenario bar are immediately reflected in all of the graphs and the summary statistics that we're presented with. So the reference and target year selectors allow us to define the beginning and end of our period of interest, which affects all of our summary stats and our graphs. Above this, the scenario selector dropdown allows us to choose between different named scenarios. So with scenarios, we can think of scenarios as different collections of actions and model parameters. So most tool setups include at least a baseline scenario in which all actions are off or inactive, and a climate action plan scenario or something similar in which all actions are on or active in the tool. However, any combination of actions and parameters can be saved and named by a tool's admin user. So for example, a city might have a confirmed measures scenario in which only the committed or funded actions are active. And when this scenario is on, then to use that to sort of highlight the gap between the forecasted emissions under this known certain to be implemented actions and the city's emission targets. Finally, the Edit Scenario button opens the Scenario Editor panel in which all the actions and parameters are listed. So all action cards have this included in scenarios toggle, which allows users to turn these on and off individually. In addition to that, parameter sliders can be adjusted here. If any changes are made, the tool switches into custom scenario mode, which is saved for the user between their sessions with the tool. So this allows anyone to experiment, explore different possible combinations of actions and parameter settings in the tool, and see the results. So just to briefly recap, we've covered a number of topics related to climate actions in the CADS tool. So to begin, we discussed action impact assessment, how action impacts are calculated within the CADS tool, the effective causal depth in the tool's calculation model, and what users need to bring to the tool for different use cases. So the message here, similar to Kim's, I think, is to consider your use case and from a technical perspective, where you need to fall on the simple versus detailed action assessment spectrum to meet your needs with the tool. Next, we discussed the tool's presentation of action results, the actions list, detailed action pages, and cost efficiency and cost benefit visualizations. So the guiding principle here is that the tool is intended to present a relatively simple overview of results and then allow users to dig into increasing levels of detail as needed. So for example, from those simple summary statistics in the action list down to the underlying causal network on the detailed actions pages. And finally, I presented the scenarios, so collections of actions or parameter settings, which together define one potential pathway among many possibilities. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for your attention, and I'll give the floor back to Olena. I'm not sure if we have too much time for questions now, but I'd be happy to answer questions now or later.
Thank you so much, Michael. We'll have the breakout rooms at the end, but Michael can be present just in one of them. So you have now two choices, either to write your questions into the chat or to come to Turku in September and try to test all of your questions and all of your interest points about the tool in practice already. So yeah, two lines of potential action in here. Our first presenter from the piloting cities of the Climate-4-CAST project is Tampere. So I would invite Emmy to present their case of the actions impact assessment approach. And this is just an illustrative slide. Feel free, Emmy, to share your presentation now and go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Yes, I will share this, and I think you can see it now.
Very good.
Yes. So, okay. Hi everyone. I'm Emmi Nieminen from the city of Tampere, development specialist there and environmental economist. And I just want to tell you what we have been doing in Tampere in this Climate-4-CAST project and how we have included our economic calculations in the CADS tool. So this might be a bit overlapping with Michael's very good presentation, but there's still some new kind of slides as well and illustrations. So not overlapping too much, I hope. A quick overview what I'm gonna show you. First, I'm gonna show some kind of illustration on our action-specific visualizations that we have included in the CADS tool. So those are the simply direct cost and then cost and benefits, then this cost effectiveness analysis, and then regional impacts that we have made. And then I'm going to show you one separate assessment for the whole transportation sector that we have also included in our Tampere's CADS tool. So it's not any single action, but it's like a wider kind of impact assessment for the whole transportation sector. And then just the last slides are these kind of extra features in the tool that we have also included in Tampere. So it's the parameter sliders that Michael already showed, and then the annuity calculations. But first, a short introduction into Tampere's climate budget and the CADS tool. So our purpose of the tool is because, well, we have our climate budget. We have had it already for 6-7 years. It's a governance model or tool that is designed to ensure sufficient funding for our city organizations' climate action. And we also use it to report on the amount of money spent on the climate actions. But in this Climate-4-CAST project, we have developed this CADS tool that shows and visualizes the impacts of our climate actions. And the CADS tool in Tampere, it's not directly linked to our already existing climate budget, but we think that it allows us to illustrate some of the climate budget measures that are already in the climate budget. So we can illustrate the impacts of those actions, and we also hope that in the future we can provide important information when we negotiate on the funding within our budget planning process. So that's our goal. We are not there yet, but we hope to get there, because of course we want to utilize the tool in the near future. And I also have to mention that our CADS tool, it also includes some actions that are implemented by other sectors than the city organization itself. So we also have some actions that affect the households or private companies. So it's not only about the actions that the city organization implements itself. And then the key functions of our tool. Well, it illustrates the different impacts of the climate measures that can be used in decision making and planning. And mostly our impact calculations are performed outside the tool, even though Michael just explained that there is this detailed action feature as well in the CADS tool, and it's possible to do some parts of the calculation inside the tool. And of course, with the parameter sliders, you can change the impacts and the outcomes, and you can do some sort of calculation. But basically, the main calculations in Tampere, we have done those outside the tool, and then we insert the data in the tool and visualize the output in the tool. And the tool visualizes the most cost-effective and impactful climate measures to reduce the emissions and it enables us to show also other monetary benefits that result from implementing the climate measures. But let's have a closer look at our economic analysis or visualizations. So the very simplest way to present the economic outcomes is just to show the direct costs of any climate action, which means the investment and operating costs of the measure compared to the baseline scenario. So this figure just simply shows that, well, this example is air-to-air heat pump investments, and it just shows annually the investment costs and also the maintenance costs related to that action. But of course, it's important to include also other impacts in the analysis, and we also want to show other benefits expressed in euros in the analysis, because that gives us a more accurate overall picture of the action's impact. So that's why we also have this benefit side on the actions that Michael also showed you before. So the cost-benefit analysis simply compares the total expected costs of climate action with the total expected monetized benefits. And the benefits can be, for example, the energy cost savings, health benefits, or benefits from reduced emissions. And then we get the better understanding of the broader economic value of the actions. And for example, the monetary benefit of emission reductions for the society that can be included in the analysis, for example, by using the shadow price of carbon. And in Tampere, we have done it that way, use the shadow price of carbon. There are also other possibilities for that. But yeah, as Michael showed in the green bar, you see the benefits, and the red bar is the costs. And it's also possible to distinguish these different cost types. So, for example, you see that the benefit side really outweighs the cost side, and in this example action, which is the change in vehicle propulsion of private cars. So the benefits come from energy savings and also the saved or reduced emissions that we have monetized with the shadow cost or the shadow price of carbon. And mostly the benefits come to the private sector or the individuals, but also the society benefits a lot from this action because of the reduced emissions. And then the cost effectiveness that also Michael showed, but we think that this is really one of the most important analyses in this tool, and this is basically the figure that we have aimed at all the time within this project, because the cost effectiveness shows how much it costs to achieve 1 ton of emission reductions through that measure, and the cost effectiveness is calculated by dividing the action's net cost by its total emission reduction impact. So then we can compare the actions with consistent euro per CO2 ton basis, and it helps us to identify the most economically efficient emission reduction options. So, well, yeah, the taller the bar, the more expensive the measure is per ton of emission reduced, and the deeper or the more negative the bar, the greater the benefits generated by each ton of emissions it reduces. And the wider the bar, the greater the emission reduction potential of the measure are. So this simply helps us to know where to start when we want to start implementing measures. So we should start by implementing the measures listed on the left, because those are the most cost-effective measures. And this information we can use when we negotiate funding as part of our budget planning process. And as I told, we are not there yet, but we hope when we fix this tool and the results a little bit more, then we can use this information in our budgetary process, in our climate budgeting. And then just one slide about how the impact changes if we change some parameter. And here I changed the emission factor on for our example action, which is the replacing oil heating across the municipal building stock. So we see here that the result with the initial assumption, so that the cost efficiency or cost effectiveness is minus 364 euro per ton. And here, actually, yeah, I changed the oil price, not the emission factor. So that's why I was a bit thinking, what is wrong with this at the moment? Yeah, okay, so I changed the oil price here. And then we see that the cost effectiveness is even higher or even deeper, even more negative. So actually the measure becomes more profitable when we change the oil price parameter. Which is in the real world happening at the moment. So we see that then these kind of green investments become even more profitable to implement. And then one example is the regional impacts. In Tampere, we piloted the integration of regional impacts into the CADS tool. And we did this for 3 different climate measures. And actually the impacts of the pilot measures were all benefits. And the regional economic impacts that we included in the tool were the corporate taxes, municipal taxes, value added, and cross output. And you can see it in the figure for the example action, which is again the air-to-air heat pump investments that we have the annual regional economic impacts for this measure. And well, the main impact is the cross output, but there are smaller parts of the bars are related to the taxes and the value added. So this is also possible in the tool. But those were the action-specific calculations that we have performed in Tampere. But now I give you an example of the wider kind of visualization about the economic impacts. So this relates to the sustainable modal shift costs and benefits. So we had this calculation what are the economic impacts if our share of sustainable modes of transport in Tampere increased from the current 62% to 69% by 2030. And well, the calculations the estimates showed that the total benefits from that shift would be more than 500 million in total over that period. And the total costs would be more than 200 million euros. So the net benefits would be positive and the value would be more than 300 million euros. So in total, we really would benefit from the modal shift to be more sustainable. And we inserted these calculations and the results in the CADS tool that you can see in the figure. And the impacts were assessed separately for the city organization and also to the citizens and individuals, and then to the wider society. And you can see it in the figure that actually the individual is the one that benefits the most from this modal shift. And also the society gains you can see it in the red in the bars. But then the city organization actually have to pay a little bit from that modal shift. But when we have a little bit closer look at the results, in addition to the owner type, we can sort these results also by mode of transport or the cost type. And on the right hand side, you see that how it is how the benefits and costs are occurred over the transportation modes, which are the car, cycling, bus, walking, and tram. And actually, well, the cars are the ones that benefit the car owners, or the car drivers benefit the most, because, or how would I explain? Or it means that because when we have less cars, and some parts of the car owners start moving or using more sustainable transportation, then they have to pay less, because car owning is really expensive. So then these previous car drivers actually benefit from this kind of shift. And also the cyclist benefit, because it becomes mainly from the health benefits that increase. And if we have a look at the cost types, which are here, the health, vehicle use, ticket revenue, accident, climate change, noise, air pollution, infrastructure maintenance, ticket cost, tax, and operations. So we have quite a lot of different cost types analyzed here. So from the figure below, we see that the main benefits arise from the health benefits, and then also the vehicle use, as I just mentioned, related to the car owners, that those are the main reasons why this shift would have significant benefits. And then the cost, on the cost side, well, because the city organization, they have to enable the sustainable transportation, they have to invest a little bit more on the, for example, for the tram infrastructure, and they have to have maintenance the infrastructure. So that's why actually the city organization have to pay a little bit more. So, but in the whole, it's very beneficial shift towards the sustainable transportation. And then just very quickly, these last extra slides. So, well, Michael already explained about the parameter sliders, but yeah, the tool allows these parameter sliders through which the users can change some key parameters, such as the unit prices or emission factors. And this allows the better sensitivity analysis and flexibility to forecast the different impacts of climate actions. And in our tool, we included 4 economic parameters whose values can be adjusted, and which of course then affect the results. And those are the discount rate, district heating price, electricity price, and oil price. And with the price parameters, you can set both the initial value of the parameter and also the annual change in price. But with the discount rate, that's not possible. So you can only change the initial value of it, but not the change each year. And then the last slide about the annuity of the investments. So the investment costs can be converted into annuities, which means that the total cost of the investment is divided into equal annual payments over the economic lifetime of the investment. And this was done in Tampere's cost effectiveness calculations. And these annuities make the long-term investments comparable with annual costs and savings. So this makes it possible to compare in investments that have different lifespans. So it's then easier to compare those together. And well, then the size of the annuity depends on the investment cost, and then the time value of money, which is the interest rate used, and then the economic life of the investment. But yeah, in Tampere, we thought that we wanted to have this kind of calculation there in the tool as well. But thank you. This was Tampere's example, and I'm not sure if we have time for questions now, but at least later in the sessions. So thank you.
Thank you, Emmy. I think there were no overlaps at all. You put a very, very nice context with the local examples to the general tool functionalities that Michael presented. So that was really valuable, I think. And hopefully, fingers crossed, you get to use the tool for the official climate budgeting soon and tell us the results at some point. If not in October, then at least we keep in touch and hear how it went later as well. Thank you so much, Emmy. Yes, please, questions to the chat if something, but Emmy will also be available in one of the breakout rooms. It will be possible to discuss with her in there, or as I mentioned, in Turku in September. We invite our next speaker, who's Anders from Aarhus. I will not be putting intermediate slides, so just Anders, please share your screen if you're ready. And we will be traveling southwest from Tampere to hear about the Aarhus's local application of the impact assessment.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me on board this webinar and training course. My name is Anders Laugesen, and I'm an economist at the technical department at Aarhus Municipality in Denmark. I've been working on cost-effective climate action plans for quite some time, and it all started because the political city council in Aarhus turned out to be a little bit disappointed with both the progress, but also the cost inefficiency of previous climate actions. So 3 or 4 years ago, we were given the task of drafting a new climate economic approach. And I took on that endeavor, and I've been working with cost effectiveness and climate action plans, at least to some level, ever since. And then we've been very fortunate to be on board this Climate-4-CAST Interreg project that fits perfectly with our local ambitions. And I've crafted a little slide deck here, which is a little bit different from what you've just seen from Council and Tampere, because I had the feeling that they would really go into specifics within the tool, which was very nice, by the way. But I will try to address this headline, cost-effective climate actions, from a more theoretical point of view, and also perhaps discuss some alternatives and some new things to think about. So we'll talk about our concept called shadow prices. It varies perhaps a little bit from what you just saw in Emmy's presentation, so I'll be very clear on the definition in a bit. Then we'll present a really simple theoretical framework, and I'll talk a lot about various scopes of analysis, scope 1 and 2, versus consumption-based emissions, and scope 3. And then I'll talk a lot about discounting in particular, because the politicians in Aarhus, they are myopic to a large extent. So we will now present some kind of a shadow price definition where discounting is taking a central role. And then I'll talk a little bit about how cost effectiveness is presented within our climate action plan and also within the CADS tool, the causal tool that you just saw being presented by Emmy. And then I'll give you 2 examples. And if you have questions along the way, you're very welcome to interfere and just raise your hand. I'll be happy to take questions, but I cannot see your hands. So maybe Olena can say if there are any questions along the way.
Yep.
All right. So what are shadow prices in the Aarhus context and definition? Well, it's basically just the cost per ton of CO2 reduced. So this is also what Michael called the marginal abatement cost, but the small change to the definition being used by Michael is that we will apply discounting, because politicians, they don't care so much about cost in the future, but our local politicians, at least, they care very much about short-term CO2 reductions, because we have a very ambitious climate target. Currently, the politicians want to become climate neutral already in 2030. So when we write up our cost effectiveness measure, we should really discount initiatives where the CO2 effects are in the far future. So our shadow price definition and apparatus take care of these differing time horizons that are seen when it comes to our climate action plan. And by focusing on shadow prices, we can rank the actions, just like Emmy just showed, and prioritize the most cost-effective actions. And that approach has been a very central tool within our current climate action plan, which is based upon a political agreement that was made exactly 2 years ago in 2024. So what do I mean when I say shadow price here? Well, it's basically just the discounted cost of a climate initiative divided by the discounted CO2 reductions. And as said, that takes care of the fact that the politicians are myopic. They don't care about costs that occur in future election cycles, but they do care very much about the timing of the CO2 reductions. Also, I think it's fair to say that the climate cares quite a bit about the timing. You know, CO2 reductions near term are very much needed. And if we do not introduce the discounting here when we write up the cost effectiveness measure called the shadow price, then we might we might end up with a scenario where the reductions occur way too late in relation to tipping points and stuff like that. All right. We have in Aarhus 3 types of shadow prices that we try to distinguish between. Our main shadow price that we focus on, that's the budget economic cost to the municipality. So here we disregard social or socioeconomic cost to the citizens. We mainly focus on our local municipal cost because we have a very limited budget for reaching our climate targets. At the very bottom, you can see that in some instances, we also focus on societal shadow prices, where we basically include all kinds of externalities on citizens and businesses, both within Aarhus, but also out of Aarhus. And then we also operate with what is called time-corrected shadow prices, where we basically disregard both cost very far in the future, but also CO2 effects very far into the future, because we have near-term climate targets. So in some instances, it might be relevant to disregard effects very far into the future, and that is what this time-corrected shadow price takes care of. I think I pretty much covered, the material here. The main point is that by writing up the shadow prices for the various climate initiatives or climate measures, you can rank the actions by the cost and present a ranking to the politician and hope that they will somehow look at that when they make their climate action plans and political agreements about what needs to be done in the future. And we have seen that our approach here has a good effect at the political level. They look at these numbers and they take them into account, just like they wanted to do when they gave us the task of writing up this new climate economic approach that we are utilizing. And the whole idea is to be very transparent and data-driven when it comes to our climate decisions. Also one of the main goals within the Climate-4-CAST project. So what are we talking about here? Well, to make things really simple, the shadow price is just the sum of discounted costs. You can see it at the very bottom of the slide, divided by the sum of discounted CO2 reductions. And mathematically, you write it up like that. And this is not something that we invented. We are basically just following the Danish state, who has made some guidelines for the various ministries about how to think about climate initiatives. They have given us this framework, and this framework is also utilized by the city of Copenhagen, as far as I understand it. And the important thing here is that you have basically a factor called 1 plus R in both denominators here, and that takes care of the discounting, right? And in the numerator, you have XT, and that's just the municipal budget cost in a particular period of a certain climate action. And in the numerator, you have delta CO2. That's the CO2 effect of an initiative relative to a baseline where you do not undertake this particular action. So that's our shadow price here. And what you may want to do in order to disregard effects far into the future that do not really matter for local targets is to set a capital T in the summation, which is pointing towards a particular target year. So if we care very much about our 2030 target, capital T could, for instance, be 2030, and hence we disregard all effects. You could also operate with different end summations in the numerator and the denominator, depending on what you want to analyze. So we've been working with that. And it has, of course, a big effect on the shadow price, the cost effectiveness measure, as I will show you in a few slides. All right. As we know from a very big academic debate, Stern, Nordhaus, and many others, what is really important for cost effectiveness and the optimal path towards climate neutrality, that's the discounting rate. And as you saw in Emmy's slides, it's possible within the tool to have a slider for the discount rate. It really affects the ranking of the various initiatives when it comes to cost efficiency. Again, we'll just, to make things simple here in the presentation, follow the Danish Ministry of Finance, and they recommend that when it comes to time horizons for initiatives smaller than 35 years, then at the current market level of interest rates, 3.5%, that's the right one to work with. And then they recommend that you use a smaller discount rate if you have a longer time horizons for your initiatives here. But as you saw, we can just let a slider govern the discounting rate R used within our calculation here. So the tool is very flexible in that regard. So that's cool. And let me also just pinpoint that, yeah, the main difference between what you see here in the mathematical expression for the shadow price and what you saw previously, that's just the discounting, right? So if R equals 0, you basically just have the marginal abatement cost that Michael spoke about earlier, as I see it at least. All right. Given that we have a scope 1 and 2 climate target, namely climate neutrality for the municipality as a geographical entity, it's very important that our CO2 effects, called delta CO2 in a particular period, those effects are calculated as scope 1 and 2 reductions. If you do not do it like that, you will introduce some noise within your calculation, and then you will bias your cost effectiveness estimates. And that can lead to cost inefficiency when it comes to writing up the optimal climate action plan with respect to the cost. So be very clear about your scopes. We want help with minimizing the cost of obtaining climate neutrality within scope 1 and 2, and then we disregard CO2 effects out of scope 1 and 2, basically. If we are dealing with some of our new additional scope 3 and consumption-based emission targets, then of course we utilize CO2 effects within those scopes when we write up the shadow price. Within our climate action plan, we have for all climate initiatives, more or less, been calculating these shadow prices. And they are seen in the right column here. So for instance, if we look at initiatives for the municipality as a society or a geographical unit, the shadow price for a biogen energy park, NL4 is the name of that initiatives. Well, that's very low. It's only 30 Danish kroner per ton of CO2. So very low, very attractive to go in that direction. That is what the number says. And similarly, when it comes to initiatives for the municipality as an organization or a business unit, basically also incorporating all our municipal enterprises, we have these CO2 effects here. And for instance, you have TM4 that stands for Municipal Sustainable Buildings. Then you see a shadow price in the vicinity of 1,320 kroner, and that's a fairly high price to pay. And that information went to the politicians, but nevertheless, they chose to prioritize this particular approach, which is fair enough, because usually we operate with cut-off shadow prices between 1,000 and 1,500 Danish kroner per ton of CO2. So this is how we presented the material to the politicians. And that was beneficial according to the feedback we received. Yeah, as you've seen already, the CADS tool is very good at presenting cost efficiency measures. These are shown in the right column here for the various initiatives. We still have to work a little bit on incorporating the discounting, just like we are presenting the discounting to the local politicians, but that will get done. That should be no problem to get that done in the future. So probably the next time we see each other, maybe in Turku, Åbo, in September, we will have that there within our CADS tool, along with that slider for the interest rate that I spoke about. Next slide is about basically just an example and what the needed data could look like. So here we are seeing the data behind our local afforestation initiatives. And what you need? Well, you need the cost of the initiatives in the various years. And here you see that we don't pay anything after 2030. And then you need the estimated yearly CO2 reductions in order to write up the shadow price, where you have to divide the discounted cost with the discounted CO2 effects. You just discount utilizing your chosen interest rate, and then you sum your reductions, right? And here you see that you have CO2 effects far into the future, given that you're basically planting trees in this forestation attempt here. All right. We have some summary statistics that we present to the politicians. For instance, what is the CO2 effects in 2030? That's very important given that we have a point target for our emissions in 2030. So we isolate that effect here. We also spell out the yearly funds needed for this particular initiatives, and then we write up the shadow prices based upon this time series of cost and effects, right? And of course, if you cap your summation with an end year called 2030, then you end up with a shadow price which is much higher than the shadow price you get if you include all the yearly reductions up to 2040. And why is that? Well, of course, you just include many more terms within your summation in the denominator, right? And these true prices are relevant for the politicians, and they contain a lot of information about the timing of the effects and also the cost over time. So we have been presenting these numbers to the politicians, and they're quite thankful for that, because you can see that if you are not so myopic, then you can actually make a climate initiative here, which is very inexpensive. A shadow price of 101 Danish kroner, that is about, let's say, 14 euros. That's very low for a ton of CO2. And hence they went with this initiative. Here's a different initiative, and that's energy efficient municipal buildings. This is a slightly more expensive initiative when it comes to the shadow price than afforestation, but nevertheless, if you include all the CO2 effects out to 2040, you get down at a very reasonable level based upon this. So this is basically what I have prepared to present, and I'm very eager to answer any questions both now during the breakout sessions later and also by emails and meetings if you have anything. But that was the presentation of the Aarhus shadow price approach that we utilize to be cost efficient when it comes to our climate planning. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Anders. I didn't see any immediate questions, so the same approach applies later or in Turku. We continue then with the last city case presentation, and we are moving slightly southwards towards city of Norderstedt, and I welcome Toya to share her slides and present the case of impact assessment done in Norderstedt.
Yeah, good morning. My name is Toya from the city of Norderstedt, the Department of Sustainability, and Norderstedt in the north of Hamburg, and we are a medium-sized municipality. So we are also participate in the Climate-4-CAST project and would like to present today our two examples or a city case study about the costs and benefit analysis with the CADS tool. So how did Norderstedt test its tool? We had tested the tool with 18 measures in total, and the measures could divide it in four different types. We started with the 4 measures which are already finished, for which we had a very valid data. And the second type are the ongoing measures in Norderstedt with relatively valid data. And then we test the tool with 6 assumption or scenario measures and 4 external trend measures. So as Emmy or Anders just have presented, we are also calculated for the Norderstedt city case for different external trend measures regarding the actions or the climate actions from our local electricity or energy provider. And today I would like to present 3 examples from the building sector and 2 examples for the change of streetlights to LED. And these examples are important for Norderstedt because the building standard and also yes, we present the 3 building measures as well as the streetlight change. And these measures are very important for us because the stationary energy sector is the largest sector with the largest emission source for Norderstedt. And it's also on the side of the city administration, the sector with the highest budget relevance. So we had a very close look into these examples I would like to present today, and we had a deep internal discussion about the results. So I would like to start with the case about the change of streetlights to LED. Here we had a cooperation with the Department of Traffic Infrastructure, and we modeled 3 scenarios. The first scenario, the business as usual scenario, so the same interval as before and nearly the same budget as before. How would this, when will be the point when we have done all the replacement of streetlights to LED, and when is a break-even point, how high will be the savings over the next years until 2040, and how's the return on investment we will get out of this. And the second scenario is a budget target scenario. So we have an internal defined target year by 2029, and we model the scenario, how much do we have to speed up our process to reach this target year by 2029, and how much do we have to spend on top to reach this target, and yes, what about the return on investment and the payback time for this scenario. And the third scenario takes into account our budget limitations. So we had an internal discussion about pausing the change for 2 years due to the budget limitations. And we would like to demonstrate with this scenario the financial impact, so the loss of the saving effects during this pause. And what is the effect until 2040? So which data is relevant for these 3 scenarios? At first, we have these annual energy consumptions for the baseline. Then we have the minor energy consumption per year compared to the baseline energy consumption. Then we calculate with the cumulative annual energy consumption to get out the amortization rate. And on the cost and saving data side, we use the energy price and the cost per unit, the annual investment costs, as well as the cumulative annual energy cost savings. And also we need the emission data, so the greenhouse gas emission factor for the electricity. Here we use the German electricity mix, so the standard emission factor for Germany, and get out of the tool the greenhouse gas savings per year. So, and let's have a look into the main graph for this scenario. So here you can see the user interface, so the main starting point for this graph here for the business as usual scenario. So the LED change would be finished by 2035. And let's go a bit deeper. So just to zoom into the same graph here with some more explanations. So the blue bars, you can see the cumulative investment expenditure by year. And the green bars are the cumulative cost relief from electricity cost savings. And the red line, you can see the amortization rate. And when the red line crosses the zero line here, you can see the break-even point. And for this scenario, it is the year 2034. So this is just the business as a scenario that we will replace an average units like before by nearly 500 units per year. And we have an investment expenditure about 300,030, nearly 330,000 euros per year. And after 20 years, we will have a net benefit or a cost benefit about nearly 4 million, excluding the inflation rate. So, and let's have a look into the second scenario, our target scenario. So what will change when we will speed up our process, and we would like to speed up it in this way that we will finish the replacement by 2029, our target year. And as well, here you can see our explanations. We have to increase, we have to speed up our process with much more effort in the change per units per year, as well as our annual investment expenditure. And so not just more than 500 units per year, we now need 1,127 units per year to change. And our break-even point will be just 1 year earlier compared with the business as usual scenario. Here, our break-even point is the year 2033. But on the benefit side, our net benefit over the 20 years will be 1 million higher than the business as usual scenario, as you have seen before. So we have approximately 5 million instead of 4 million net benefit over the 20 years. So, and just to summarize the cost benefit for 3 scenarios, we didn't model the last scenario with the pause for 2 years. So just, you had just a view on the first 2 scenarios, and to show the difference between the 3, you can see here in the table the comparison. And if we pause the change for 2 years, we will have just approximately 3.9 million net benefit compared with the 5 or 4 million net benefit by business as usual or the target approach. And also the year of amortization will be for the pausing scenario just 2037. So this is the first scenario, and we discuss the results with the Department of Traffic Infrastructure and the head of the department, as well with some other key stakeholders. And now to the example for the building sector. Here, just a second, I would like to start. So what's the situation in Norderstedt in the building sector? Our Department of Energy and Building Management is setting up a building standard, and we would like to support this internal discussion about the building sector and the building standard. So for this, we modeled 3 different scenarios for about 3 different energy standards. And we have not the valid data in-house, so from other departments. So we had a greater look to other German cities who could provide data, and the city of Frankfurt is a German front runner on energy management. So they published an assumption for new built nursery homes and for 4 different energy standards. And we took out of these calculation example 3 different standards to show the difference and the benefits of the higher energy standards, to present this in our internal discussion and to some key stakeholders as well as decision makers. So which data was relevant for these nursery scenarios and 3 different standards? At first, the costs for the new building to the current GEG standard. This is a national standard for new buildings, which is binding for all municipalities in Germany. Then we calculated the additional costs for the higher energy efficient standard. Yes, this difference between the standard construction costs and the incremental costs for efficiency measures above the current GEG standard we call so the climate protection share. And then we need the reduce electricity and heating energy consumption through the higher energy standard, as well as a reduce of electricity and heating energy costs as well, so the operation costs. And here we can see the second key graph we can get out of the tool. This is a list overview for these 3 different types we have calculated, and closer look at some more explanations about what we can get out of information of this overview. So the first column, you can see the net costs from 2020 to 2040. And so the net costs is defined by the total investment costs minus total energy cost savings over the 20 years. And the negative number shows a positive financial benefit out of it, of this measure here. And the second line is the cost efficiency. So how much cost do we have to spend to save 1 ton of emissions? And also a negative a number shows that we have a double effect. So an effect of emission savings as well as cost savings. And this is very important information when we would like to choose the best scenario we should go on with. And on the last column, you can see the payback time over the 20 years for the additional costs versus the GEG standard. So the first scenario with the assumption about the nursery with the GEG minus 30%, we have a payback time over 70 years. And with the assumption nursery with passive house components, we have a payback time with nearly 30.5 years. And if we will build a nursery home with a nearly 0 energy standard, we have a payback time in just 10.2 years. So yeah, this is it from in Norderstedt. So we had this different scenarios calculated, and we present also the scenarios to our local politicians. And yeah, we build up a cooperation with our department for building and energy management to go deeper into the details of, for example, these different assumptions about the energy standards or the energy efficiency components. And we are still in an ongoing process and the ongoing discussion in our city. And we hope that, we will support the next steps with our results of the causal tool here, the CADS tool. And all the graphs, we find out that the graphs are were very appreciated from our internal head of the departments. They find it very logic and very easy to understand. And also the list overview is a very good overview to choose the best case or the best scenario out of it, of several measures. And we will see how it will go on in Norderstedt. So thank you very much for this here, and I hope everything was clear.
Thank you, Toya. It's a lot of information, so I think people can spend some time with it, maybe come back to the slides later and be in touch with you if something, but also, like with the previous speakers, we'll have a possibility to discuss with Toya in the breakout rooms. So thank you once again, and good luck with the decision-making process, just like for everyone else. At this point, we still have slides by me with the few final things we would like to share with you in respect to the upcoming events that we're still having within the training course. So let's begin with maybe first something which is a repetition from the previous module, but important repetition nevertheless. We discussed with the participants of the training course in the previous events that we would like to assist with the possibility to exchange with your peers and get some mentoring and get some support in your climate budgeting journey. One way is within these meetings that we're having discussions afterwards. And another way in which we can try to facilitate it is through the digital contact cards. So in the previous module and also in this one, you have seen the contacts from our speakers. You can reach out to them directly, or you can submit your own digital contact card through the web form that we have introduced previously. And the idea is that we could match your interests with the other cities that might have a suitable expertise on some subjects, and then allow you to exchange together and to coach one another and to share experiences and lessons learned. So this is an example of a fictional climate expert that would like to participate in it. So we will very much encourage you to do the same. We received some, but not enough to prepare any meaningful interaction at this point. So we really encourage you to go through this facilitated tool for the peer exchange, but also if you feel more comfortable with traditional way of reaching out to the speakers and to the partners of Climate-4-CAST, of course, there's nothing essentially preventing you from doing that as well. We just want to make it clear that we're available to help and to support and to share the experiences that have been gathered throughout the project. This is one way. Another way, and there was a lot of teasing about it and discussing, we will have a practical module 5 training, which would be basically almost concluding the training course in early autumn of this year. And as the course progressed, you have noticed that we've been starting with the very general subjects and more governance and practice related ones, down to the very nitty-gritty details of data collection and assessment of the cost benefits and all the things that go along with it. In this particular meeting, we would like to give you a possibility to use the tool, even if you don't have own data. We will be supplying some simulated data from the fictional city of Climaville, so you can try inserting it. You can try comparing some results that will not be from the actual cities in this case, which might make it a little bit biased, but will give you a possibility to get that feel how the thing could work in your own city context. So basically, the distinction between module 5 and 6 is that in the module 5, we invite the practitioners from the cities to come who actually have maybe this task of preparing climate budgeting or data gathering or financial data gathering, so that you can hear a little bit more from our cities on their perspectives, dive deeper into the tool, see how it works in practice, have a very, very practical clinic on its implementation. While in the module 6, second Climate Budget Summit in Brussels in October, we would be more targeting already politicians and decision makers who have to be convinced of making climate budget official, so to speak, and also aiding the departments with all sorts of tools and support decisions that could be made. So this one would be practical. We invite everyone who followed the course, but also who haven't, but has some experience or interest in advancing the knowledge on the tool, CADS tool developed in Turku. And we prepared here a little bit of a teaser. You can already register if you feel determined. You can take your time and check the agenda that is also linked. And yeah, we will be very happy to welcome you in Turku. We'll have some additional program with the site visits and try to allocate some time for these mentoring and peer support exchange as well. Especially if you have some particular needs or wishes, you can manifest them through the registration link and let us know what precise ideas you have. Otherwise, we will be providing first pretty general information about the tool and the project, and then dive deeper into the practical work, mini tasks, clinics, and exchanges. So this is what is planned for Turku. If you check the links, you will get a little bit more information about it, or just feel free to be in touch with me and Maria if you have some questions about the event. Thank you once again for today. This would be then the last session of the of today's module. So I will also use this opportunity to thank to all of our presenters from this module and from the previous ones. And once again, tell you that we really, really hope to see you in Turku in September.